Hello there. Welcome to the National Training on PRIMALS, Language and Learning Across the Curriculum. I am Dr. Nema Hermosa, a retired professor in reading education from the University of the Philippines. I am one of the resource persons in English. And today I am going to facilitate the session on literacy across the curriculum, changing paradigms. At the end of this session, you're expected to be able to describe the changes in the framework that underpin literacy across the curriculum, differentiate between content area literacy and disciplinary literacy, articulate the knowledge and skills teachers need to support students in developing disciplinary literacy, and appreciate the complementary roles of language arts teachers and content area teachers in developing students' content and disciplinary literacy. These are your viewing guide questions. Find answers to these as you watch the video. You will need these for the workshop task we will do after the presentation. What is the difference between developmental reading and content area reading? What are the distinctions between content area literacy and disciplinary literacy in terms of the nature of skills, textual aspects, comprehension focus, teaching strategies, and other features? And what are the complementary roles of language arts teachers and content area teachers in developing students' content area and disciplinary literacy? There is a key question to address as well. You may have heard of the catchphrase, "Every teacher is a reading teacher." Whether you agree or disagree, keep this question in mind as you watch the presentation. Okay, let's begin. First, let's define the key term, literacy. It was once known simply as the ability to read and write. Today, it's about being able to make sense of and engage in advanced reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Add to these the skill of viewing, which is another major communication area in the new curriculum. We should keep in mind this second definition when we speak of literacy across the curriculum, which can simply be described as learning literacy skills while in science, math, history, the humanities, and in other content subjects. Literacy skills are foundational to thinking, so teachers in all subject areas are encouraged to promote literacy as a means of developing thinking skills. There are two terms that we encounter when discussing literacy across the curriculum. These are content area literacy and disciplinary literacy. These two terms push the bounds of reading and writing skills beyond the language arts classroom. Let's look at the concept of content area literacy. Traditionally called content area reading, let's situate it within the overall school reading program, which has three major components: developmental reading, content area reading, and remedial reading. These components are present at all levels of schooling from kindergarten through grade 12. Developmental reading involves teaching students how to read, the basic processes of reading. In the early grades, the focus is on beginning reading, which teaches young learners the fundamentals of reading and give them opportunities to become fluent readers. In the intermediate grades, developmental concerns shift to advancing students' word attack skills and their use of higher levels of comprehension. In high school, students need instruction in how to work with expository writing, research skills, strategies for finding and using multiple sources of information, and critical thinking. As students go up the grades, the emphasis gradually shifts from developmental reading to content area reading. This refers to reading and writing in content subjects, such as math, science, social studies, and literature. At the high school and college level, content area reading takes center stage. We often say, first, you have to learn to read, and then you read to learn. Direct instruction is another phrase that refers to developmental reading, while functional instruction refers to content area reading. Note that reading and language teachers take care of the direct instruction of literacy skills, while content teachers take care of functional instruction. This paradigm has changed with corresponding changes in terms. More recently, the term disciplinary literacy has entered the educational jargon. This diagram shows the advancing levels of literacy as the student goes up the grades from basic literacy to intermediate literacy and finally to disciplinary literacy. Basic literacy occurring in grades pre-K to 3 involves decoding and knowledge of high-frequency words that underlie virtually all reading tests. Intermediate literacy, covering grades 4 through 6, include the skills common to many tasks, such as generic comprehension strategies, common word meanings, and basic fluency. Disciplinary literacy, which becomes the focus in grades 7 through 12, refers to literacy skills specialized to history, science, math, literature, and other subject areas. If we merge the old and new paradigms, this is how it would look. Note that in the new paradigm, the term reading has given way to literacy. Developmental literacy is the main focus of basic levels. At the intermediate levels, the overlap of content area literacy and developmental literacy is evident. As you go up the curriculum ladder, more and more specialized literacy skills are required. Thus, content area literacy gives way to disciplinary literacy. Richard Vaca, a well-known expert on content area reading, observes, and I quote, "Adolescents entering the adult world in the 21st century will read and write more than at any other time in human history. They will need advanced levels of literacy to perform their jobs, run their households, act as citizens, and conduct their personal lives." Close quote. Again, take note of the phrase advanced levels of literacy. Specialized and advanced levels of literacy are characteristics of disciplinary literacy. To summarize our discussion so far, content area literacy and disciplinary literacy, though complementary approaches, are not synonymous. According to the International Literacy Association, these are umbrella terms that describe two approaches to literacy instruction embedded within different subject areas or disciplines. In the next slides, we will look more closely at the distinctions between the two. I am indebted to Dr. Tim Shanahan, former president of the ILA, for most of the ideas in the comparison. In content area literacy, or CAL, skills are generalizable across different content areas, while those in DL, or disciplinary literacy, are specialized and unique to a particular discipline. Consequently, CAL provides students with a toolbox of strategies to use with any kind of text, while in DL, strategies depend on the demands of the text and purposes of the discipline. Here is a list of teaching strategies that are taught in CAL. They can be used with any texts across all subject areas. Strategies in DL are aligned with the learning demands and purposes of the discipline. For example, the use of textbooks may be essential in science, but may be irrelevant in literature. The three-read strategy is unique to mathematics. An example of a generic strategy across content areas is the popular KWL. What I know, what I want to know, what I learned. The literature example is on George Orwell's novels, The Animal Farm and 1984. Ang ehemplo sa araling panlipunan o kasaysayan ay tungkol sa epekto ng kolonyalismo at imperialismo sa Timog at Kanlurang Asya. In this variation, there is a fourth column, S, which stands for what I still want to know. The science example is on ecosystems, and the one in math is on integers. We can also distinguish CAL and DL in terms of the focus of vocabulary instruction. In CAL, the student needs to learn terminology in all fields, or those used in various types of subject matter. Strategies for vocab development are generic and applicable no matter what the words. These include graphic organizers, word sorts, semantic maps, semantic feature analysis, among others. In DL, we focus on the specialized nature of the vocabulary of the subject. For example, in science, it would be good to study Greek and Latin roots, as many specialized terms are derived from these roots. In history, students need to pay attention to metaphorical terms or those used with a political point of view. Semantic feature analysis is an excellent strategy for vocabulary and concept development across the curriculum. This strategy uses a grid to help students explore how sets of things are related to one another. You have the vocabulary or concept words on the x-axis and the important features related to the topic in the y-axis, or it's the other way around. vocabulary and concepts in the y-axis, and the features and characteristics in the x-axis. The students will put a plus sign if the feature is present in the word, or a minus sign if it is not. So once the grade has been filled out, the students can make a summary of the features of particular concepts, as well as compare and contrast them with one another. By completing and analyzing the grid, students are able to see connections, make predictions, and master important concepts. This strategy enhances both comprehension and vocabulary skills. This example for history is on early civilizations. The one for biology is on animals. This one for physics is on sources of energy. For literature, the example is on eras in British literature. And for math, the example is on polygons. Academic vocabulary is very important in CAL and especially in DL. Technical terms have to be understood for concepts to be mastered. Here are some technical terms in math. I know that many students struggle remembering or even just pronouncing these terms. Here is one tongue twister in science. I myself cannot readily pronounce what DNA stands for in one go. I need to read it syllable by syllable. Students' knowledge of a fixation will help them understand such terms. Notice how Greek and Latin roots are very important in understanding scientific terms. In literature, students need to pay attention to words that evoke emotion and appeal to the senses, like these lines from Gerard Manley Hopkins' God's Grandeur. Let me just read, I think, the second stanza. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives the dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last lights of the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with bright wings. For literature, students have to pay attention to the role of rhyme, rhythm, figurative language, alliteration, and many other literary elements. Students must also be able to distinguish between general and specialized meanings. For example, the word sugar. In the general dictionary, sugar is a sweet crystalline substance obtained from various plants, especially sugar cane and sugar beet, consisting essentially of sucrose and used as a sweetener in food and drink. Whereas in the science dictionary, sugar is now called a saccharide, and it is defined as shown. Also, you have these different types: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Students must also be aware that a word will have a meaning in one discipline and a different meaning in another discipline. In history, the word revolution will be likely defined as the first forcible overthrow of a government or social order in favor of a new system. In science, a revolution is something else. For instance, in astronomy, it means the revolution of planets around the sun. For making meaning, the focus in CAL is on the use of reading and writing to study and learn information. That is, the focus is to learn information from the text, not to read like a chemist, but to know how to study books, including chemistry books. And there are certain strategies that can help the students with this, such as the use of advanced organizers, the dictionary, response journals, and many more. In DL, the focus is on how literacy is used to make meaning within the discipline. For example, knowing cultural differences in how information is used, the nature of language, and the demands for precision in the discipline, among others. What do we mean by the culture of the discipline? For example, in math, the goal is to arrive at the truth. So we do a lot of close reading and rereading. Math reading requires a precision of meaning, and each word must be understood specifically in service to that particular meaning. Unlike other fields, even function words are important. For example, the article the has a very different meaning than the article a. An example of a close reading strategy which only occurs in math is the 3-read process, which has 5 steps as shown in the slide. On the other hand, history is interpretative. Authors and sources, especially primary sources, are central in interpretation. Students need to see history as argument based on partial evidence and to see narratives as more than facts. Bias and prejudice have to be gleaned by the student in reading historical materials. This is why single texts are problematic in history. There has to be corroborative material to get more evidence in order to make valid conclusions about the historical event being studied. Unlike historians, chemists create knowledge through experimentation. The findings of experiments are somewhat dependent upon the quality of the instrumentation, the design, and the statistical analysis. So what is important to reading chemistry is a full understanding of the way in which an experiment took place and the processes the experiment uncovered. Gaining that full understanding requires chemists to think about the phenomenon being presented in prose, to visualize it, and to manipulate it in formulas and equations. Major strategies include corroboration and transformation of evidence. In CAL, we often encourage the use of literary text to enhance the study of content in history, science, and math. Supplementary materials in the form of short stories, poetry, novels, and plays can deepen content learning and make it more engaging. The use of thematic units and the integrated curriculum are strategies for this purpose. In DL, of course, the focus is on the use of disciplinary texts. Readers need to confront the language of the discipline. As we have seen from the slides on vocabulary in science, students need to come to terms with technical, abstract, dense, and tightly knit language. Much use of nominalization and focus on causation rather than intention. What about the role of graphics? In CAL, graphics are usually used as adjuncts. The interpretive skills are general for pictures, tables, charts, and other visual elements. More often, there are no differences across the disciplines. But in DL, there is a difference between technical drawing and other drawings or photos that are more descriptive, sequential, relational, hierarchical, or causal. And there is a need for translating them into the concepts they represent. For example, in many CAL texts, you can have the text illustrated in many different ways. You can use illustrations, photographs, diagrams, various types of graphs, maps, and charts. These are used to enhance the understanding of prose. Excuse me. Whereas in DL, many of the graphics are technical illustrations. They are more precise and in most cases integral to the text itself. We have seen the features that distinguish content area literacy from disciplinary literacy. Here is a helpful way of looking at those distinctions. Both CAL and DL strategies depend on the use of texts to produce subject matter expertise in students. The difference, however, depends on what teachers focus on. Do they focus on what students are learning or on how they are learning it? In CAL, the focus is on content. Do the students understand what the text says? In DL, teachers go beyond content and focus on the process or how. How then do we teach disciplinary literacy? As ILA points out, disciplinary standards do not propose that subject matter teachers develop basic reading strategies or study skills. Disciplinary literacy is about teaching students to read like historians, scientists, mathematicians, and literary critics. What does it mean to read like a historian? Here are the focus questions students need to ask and answer when studying history. What questions do we ask of the past? How can we find out? How do we evaluate the evidence? What matters? Why does it matter? More specifically, historians ask and seek answers to these questions. What were the causes of past events? What were the effects? How does the past help us make sense of the present? How did people in the past view the world? How did past decisions or actions affect future choices? What has changed? What has remained the same? These questions are particular to history. We do not ask them when we study other content subjects. To read like a scientist means using literacy skills as one applies the scientific method. In this updated version, there are additional steps to the traditional steps of making an observation, asking questions, making hypotheses, conducting the experiment, drawing conclusions, and communicating the results. In this version, you can see the loops and back arrows that indicate additional tasks within the major steps. For example, what do you do when the procedure does not work? What do you do when results do not align with the hypothesis? In studying science, students must distinguish between an observation and a hypothesis, or an inference. In this cartoon, Homer Simpson shows us the difference between an observation and an inference, which can be a scientific opinion. What does it mean to think like a mathematician? A mathematician thinks in terms of structure and asks, what kind of problem is this? Does it remind me of another I have solved? Will changing the form help? He thinks in terms of quantities and asks, what can I count? What can I measure? How are the quantities related? How can I represent the quantities so I can see the relationships? A mathematician thinks in terms of repetition and asks, is there a process that keeps repeating? Am I counting, building, drawing the same way each time? Do I keep repeating the same set of calculations? How can I use repetition to write about a rule? In literature, disciplinary literacy would involve the thinking processes of a literary critic. A literary critic studies, evaluates, and interprets literature. He identifies what is good about a text and highlights it for the attention of others. Further, the critic uses a particular lens through which a literary work is viewed. For example, a feminist critic might ask these questions. In what ways is patriarchy present in a particular work? How are the effects of patriarchy evident in the lives of the characters? And other questions in the same vein. From the previous slides, we have seen that in each discipline, students need to learn the following: the specialist vocabulary associated with that area, how to read and understand its texts, how to communicate knowledge and ideas in appropriate ways, and how to listen and read critically, assessing the value of what they hear and read. Even if I made distinctions between content area literacy and disciplinary literacy in the previous slides, remember that these two approaches to literacy instruction are not mutually exclusive. If we liken literacy instruction to a tree, content area literacy can be seen as the trunk, while disciplinary literacy in different disciplines can be seen as the branches. Students practice common literacy strategies in CAL, then use more discipline-specific frameworks and practices as they read and write texts in the different subject areas. Of course, let us not forget that CAL and DL cannot take place without developmental literacy. As the foundational skills, that would be the roots. CAL and DL tasks are usually embedded within a disciplinary lesson. Here is an example in English. In this example, the anchoring disciplinary activity is the use of rhetorical devices when creating public service announcements to encourage people to take action on an issue. And the texts used to support the activity include photographs, videos, other visual or oral representations around the topic of the PSA, and then examples of PSAs. An example of an embedded CAL activity would be the use of a basic graphic organizer, such as a storyboard, to record and organize the students' initial ideas. While an example of an embedded DL activity will be that while viewing model PSAs, the students will identify and evaluate how their creators use particular forms of language, images, or sounds to appeal to intended audiences. So this skill is specific to the discipline. Here are examples for math and science. You can review the slides later to look at the details in these slides. So with the different components of literacy instruction across the curriculum, let's go back to this slide. This slide shows the overlaps between and among literacy standards and competencies in the different subjects. A group who studied the Common Core standards found these intersections among English, math, and science standards. The intersection between math and science has to do with the use of models and computational thinking. Between math and English, we have the use of technology tools and digital media. And between English and science, the standard of obtaining, evaluating, synthesizing, and communicating information overlap or intersect. And among all three, we see this standard engaging, constructing, and critiquing arguments based on evidence. So with the different components of literacy instruction across the curriculum, we can now ask who teaches which. English literacy standards are meant to support, not supplant, the subject area standards. They are meant to buttress the teaching and learning of content. Earlier, I showed you the old paradigm, and this was also true in that case. The same obtains in this new paradigm as well. The difference is that now there is more focus on disciplinary literacy shown in bands here, especially in the upper grades. Teachers in kindergarten through grade 3 would still be mainly doing developmental literacy instruction. As they normally teach self-contained classes, they would generally work across subjects and would address reading, listening, speaking, and writing in the content areas. Differentiation mainly starts in the intermediate grades. English teachers are responsible for developmental literacy, but integrate content area literacy when using texts on different disciplines. Content area teachers are the ones responsible for the CAL and DL in their disciplines. English teachers, however, are responsible for CAL and DL in literature. This differentiation increases in high school through college. English standards are merely tools to support the teaching of core disciplinary ideas. Content area teachers will be embedding more and more disciplinary literacy instruction in their disciplines. Although ELA and content area teachers have their respective roles to play in advancing the school's literacy program, the need for collaboration is obvious, as the ILA has observed. When educators work together to plan and implement disciplinary literacy practices over time, both reading and language standards and content standards are more likely to be met, and students will develop a deeper understanding of the content. So I end with this note. A school's literacy program works best when reading and language teachers and content teachers respect and understand each other's roles and collaborate to help all students learn and be engaged with text. That ends our presentation. So let us now look at these instructions for your workshop task. That would be an individual task. If you have not done so yet, download the viewing and workshop guide sheet, which comes with which came with this video. Do the tasks as directed there. Write your answers on the sheet. And remember that you will be sharing your outputs this afternoon during the synchronous Zoom meeting. Also, I encourage you to watch the short video titled Literacy in Other Disciplines that comes with your session 1 materials. Okay, thank you and see you later in our synchronous Zoom meeting this afternoon.